and welcome to Risky Business. If you grew up playing the NES, probably come across this weird game called Monster Party. It's an action platforming game where you play as a kid with a baseball bat in a world inhabited by monsters. The baseball bat can be used to hit projectiles back at enemies, and a magic pill transforms the boy into a monster who can fly and shoot at enemies. The transformation lasts for only a short time. While it's not a game that comes up in the conversations about classic games very often, it certainly has a cult following, and it's one of the more strange games to ever make it to the NES. It's incredibly dark, and the environments are full of blood and guts. Knowing Nintendo of America's family-friendly image in the 80s and 90s, it makes me wonder how such a game got made in the first place. When I first started looking into this game, I was sure this must have been a Japanese title originally. The zombies you encounter in the first area look like the bullies from Japanese anime and manga, with their uniforms and their pompadour hairstyle. There's these human-faced dogs that walk around that are straight out of Japanese folklore. But I was really surprised to learn that this game was never released in Japan.
Surely you can't be serious.
Monster Party's only release was in North America in 1989. And while the game was published by Bandai Namco, it was developed by Human Entertainment, a Japanese developer that would go on to make games for just about every console you could think of before going bankrupt in the year 2000. Human even published quite a few titles during their business tenure and are best known for the Fire Pro Wrestling series, and more appropriate to the horror content of Monster Party, Clock Tower. Shinsei is also credited, and my understanding is that the game began its life with Shinsei, but was taken over by Human when Shinsei either went out of business or lost the contract somehow. It's not exactly clear. With characters inspired by Japanese legends and tropes, a Japanese publisher and a Japanese developer, it's even more puzzling that this game was not released in Japan. There was definitely a piece of the puzzle that was missing.
Oh, I don't know what it was. It doesn't matter anyway.
That particular puzzle piece was found in the 2000s, when photos of an unreleased prototype were shared online. On May 26, 2011, a prototype cartridge was listed on Yahoo Auctions in Japan, and sold for the equivalent of about $6,000 US. The ROM of the prototype was leaked online on July 3rd of 2014. The game was originally called Parody World Monster Party, and was intended to be a comedy game, with the monsters being silly or ridiculous versions of monsters from legends, film, and TV. Some of the parody designs include a giant spider who apologizes for being dead, an aggressive fried shrimp, and a sphinx whose legs have fallen asleep. This reminds me a lot of another game I covered on this channel called Ginga Ninkyouden, so if you like Japanese parody games, definitely check out that video as well. I was very interested to know more about the brilliant and twisted minds who came up with this game, but it was rather difficult to track them down. Like many Japanese developers, they had a habit of using pseudonyms in the in-game credits, especially in a comedy or parody game like this one. The game's designers are credited as Cream Haruna, Kamiyanki, Dandy Kobayashi, and Dragon Nakashima, though their pseudonyms are much more horror-themed in the original Japanese prototype. Cream Haruna is a pseudonym for Hiroshi Haruna, who also worked on Human Sports Festival, Kabuki Quantum Fighter, The Adventures of Gilligan's Island, and the horror mystery La Place No Ma on the Super Famicom, as well as many other titles. Dandy Kobayashi most likely refers to Yuichi Kobayashi, who was a designer on F1 Pole Position 2 and Motocross Champion. Dragon Nakashima could be Kazuyuki Nakashima, who also designed popular PCE shooter Blazing Lasers around the same time. I was unable to determine who Kamiyanki is, as I was unable to track down any designer from Human Entertainment whose name was Kamiya. This may be one of several made-up individuals who didn't actually work on the game but were just added to the credits for comedy. Programmer Jazzy Toru is most likely Toru Hayashi, who programmed Fire Pro Wrestling 2, Gilligan's Island, Ultraman, and many others, and also composed music for a number of games. The other programmers, Sokiosk and Desire Taro, are still a mystery to me. Taro's name in the Japanese credits is Nurikabe Taro. Nurikabe is a wall demon from Japanese folklore. Nurikabe, Kamiyanki, and Dandy Kobayashi, all of those, like I said before, I think they're most likely just there for comedy and might not actually represent a real person. In the prototype, they're credited in different ways. George A. Kamiya, like George Romero, and Baki Carpenter, as a reference to John Carpenter. For graphics, I was able to find that Yuichi Kobayashi and Taka Saito are the most likely individuals there. Kobayashi would go on to create graphics for Silent Hill 2 and Castlevania Lament of Innocence, and Curse of Darkness. Saito created graphics through the late 90s and eventually worked on Cybernator and the Langrisser series. The music composers were probably T. Mikumo, who also composed music for Venus Senki and Motocross Champion, and Masaki Hashimoto, best known for Fire Pro Combination Tag, Kabuki Quantum Fighter, Gilligan's Island, and Ultraman. In addition to the scarier pseudonyms, the Japanese prototype includes a number of other differences. For one, the green slime on the title screen is presented as red blood, and there's more detail in a number of boss enemies and environments. For example, the singing plant has a microphone and a PA, and instead of the Pumpkinhead boss, you actually fight a mounted ape from the Planet of the Apes. That's one of several changes that most likely had to do with copyright problems. There are also some animations added to the final version that were absent in the prototype. Most likely this is because the prototype wasn't completely finished yet, and a lot of the boss dialogue was translated really poorly. A lot of times with these localizations, especially back then, it was simply due to character limitations. You can only fit so much data on these carts, and sometimes having too many letters in the text was one of the first things to cut in order to make more space. So that's all I have on Monster Party. It is a very fun game. I do recommend playing it. The game is very challenging. It gets harder as you go on, and the horror motifs and parodies are worthwhile just to get through the game and check them out. I really hope you've enjoyed this video, so if you could, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Tell me what other games you're curious about. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. We're going to keep taking a look at some different stuff here, but I think for our next episode, we're going to revisit the list format that I did with my top 25 Super Nintendo games of all time, and we're going to take a look at the top 25 NES games of all time. I think that's going to be a really fun list. And again, these are going to be my opinion, so don't take it too seriously. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game over.